Hi everyone, today's little video is about how to understand transactional texts for the media. You need to be able to write them, but more importantly, maybe you need to just be able to read them critically. So this video will also show you how that is done. Those are the 4 types of transactional texts that are discussed in the study guide handout. Let's look at the first one very briefly, reviews. You'll see the handout looks like this. So on that first page, I highlighted the most important thing about reviews, which is you can only judge a creative work against the standards or goals that it holds up for itself. For instance, say someone comes into my class and wants to judge if I'm a good teacher. They can't judge me as a grade 1 teacher because I'm a grade 10 and 11 teacher. So they would misjudge me if they were using the wrong standard. So that's just a very quick example. So whenever you look at reviewing a book or a movie, you've got to look at the genre. Okay, so that's the word I highlighted here. And another way to judge it is to look at what that writer or that playwright or that movie maker did the previous time. Okay, so for instance, there I've highlighted that there. If you go and review a play, you've got to see how does this compare to other plays. So you either judge it against its genre, which is the standard it's set out for itself, or you judge it against the previous things that have been similar. Does that make sense? Okay, so then we're moving on to the next one, which is news reports. So that's all explained here. The words that I've highlighted is that news reports must have the 5 W's and the H, which gives you all the facts. Okay, so that's the most important paragraph in the notes I've highlighted for you there. And the example here doesn't have any quotes, but I just want to show you in the other handout, which is this Jib Jib story about the hip-hop artist. You'll see even in the hard news story, which was the newspaper story from the Soweto, from the Star. It was published in the Star as a newspaper article originally in 2010. Even in this news report, people are quoted. Okay, so it's very important here to see that the lawyer is quoted here, okay, because he's the most important person to quote, and he's quoted again at the end. So even in a newspaper story, try to quote people. Then we're moving on to the next type of story, which is I've shown you reviews, news reports, now magazine articles. I'm going to go into a little bit of depth on magazine articles. Just let me get to that page. So if you turn over, you'll see here's magazine articles. What I want you to take note of there, the headline is usually very catchy, much more creative, using figures of speech. There's a blurb. Okay, so the blurb you'll see in all the examples I've given you. This example, there's your headline. The blurb comes right underneath and gives you a bit of a taste of what the story is about. So there's that example. Then we also looked at this example, okay, creative headline, and right underneath it is the blurb, which tells you roughly what it's about and invites you into the story. And another one that you'll look at, very creative headline, it's an allusion to a TV show, and underneath it is the blurb. So that's the blurb, always comes straight under the headline. Okay, then the structure. This example, which we've discussed in class, has an anecdotal introduction, also called an anecdotal lead. So I was telling you guys it's very much like William Blake's poem, The Chimney Sweeper, where he has a little anecdote in the first stanza. So anecdotal lead, story by someone who actually experienced this problem. And then it goes over into editorial, which is where the writer says something in his own words or her own words, much like William Blake also does by stanza 3 in the poem Chimney Sweeper. So anecdote, and then what I want to point out here is a term that's used in magazine writing, the nut graph, paragraph. It's spelt in two different ways. There, I've got it highlighted there. The nutgraph paragraph, if you want to speed read a magazine story, that is the paragraph you look for. It's roughly the third paragraph. It will tell you what the story is about. Okay, so that sort of leads you in and is inviting. But round about the third paragraph, skip the anecdote because that's not an actual paragraph. 1, 2, 3. Here you have, you cut, burn, or hurt yourself to release pain. The cuts, burns make you feel better and you can cope. So this is about self-mutilation and why people do it. This story from Marie Claire, this is a Marie Claire story, has a very good example of a nut graph. There's paragraph 1, there's paragraph 2, and here's paragraph 3. Here you have all the facts. He was Peter Brownson, that's who he was, what he did for a job, what happened to him, why did he get into trouble, he was on the run from the police, what did he actually do in the end? He slit people's throats, and that's why he's in trouble. So third paragraph literally gives you all the facts, the 5 W's and the H, who, what, when, why, where, what, and how, all those ones. Okay, so if you understand the nut graph, sometimes the nut graph is a bit obscure, like in this story called Under Siege. There's your headline, there's your blurb, then you have, this is the only editorial you have, because on the next page, it goes straight into interviews. Interviews with 2 people from the public, Vox Pop, and interviews with 2 experts commenting on what they've experienced. But here you can see roughly round about the 3rd, 4th sentence, it says here, we seem to live in a culture of violence. There you have the nut graph. That's what the story is about. So that's what I wanted to explain there in the notes, which I've highlighted. Then the champagne glass structure is a different type of structure. There are many different types of structures for magazines. Obviously, if you want to empathize with someone, you're going to do this kind of structure where you give an anecdote first. You get someone who's actually experiencing the problem, who you empathize with, to give their story, and then you talk about it further. However, say you don't really empathize with the person, then you're going to have a story like this. The champagne glass is very useful when you don't want to really empathize that much, because here you have the case of the Jib Jib guy who was the hip-hop artist, and it says here in the hard news that he killed a couple of pupils because he drove into them. So what you're going to do there is you're going to use the champagne glass, and this is the example of someone who tried it. So it's another story written by a young writer of 17 for young writers, very much like the other story about cutting away the pain, written for young writers by young writers. But in this case, she's using something different, because this is something where she feels she doesn't empathize much. She doesn't empathize with the people the people that caused the crime, and she also doesn't empathize with the people who are expressing their pain. So what she's done right up front in the intro, she's got all the 5 W's and the H. She's got when it happened, she's got who did it, she's got where it happened in Soweto. She says what happened, people were killed, 2 are left in critical condition, and also how they were hit by the cars that these hip-hop artists were driving. And then she's also got the why, which is they were basically under the influence of alcohol, and they were also taking morphine and cocaine. So that's the champagne glass. And if you look at a literal champagne glass, that's exactly what a champagne glass looks like. At the top, it's got a very wide brim. So a lot of bubbles can be seen right at the top. So that's the top of your story, has all the bubbles, all the facts. And then you go down, and at the bottom, you have this foot of the champagne glass, which it stands on. And that is what is you call in magazines is your kicker of your story. So if you turn over that story, you'll see, okay, this student didn't complete a story, so I made a suggestion here. The kicker is something that's catchy, that has a bit of wordplay, some kind of figure of speech here to describe your final comment on it, which relates to the actual happening. So you'll see it says here, in the end, we have to ask ourselves, is living in the fast lane worth it if you leave so many haters in your wake? more importantly, driving yourself and your fellow learners to distraction, is perhaps not the best way to deal with tragedy and loss. So the metaphors that are used are related to driving, which relates to the story, and it ends up being a sort of a kicker is very much like a twist in the tale if you compare it with a short story. So there you have a structure called the champagne glass structure, which is just a different way to structure a story if you feel that you want to maybe be a little bit more critical. However, that story still contains many quotes from actual people that were interviewed. Then, if you turn over, you can judge all these stories yourself by looking at these three things. Magazine stories must always persuade, inform, and entertain. That's their goal. They must always have sources, which can be secondary sources that you find online. They must always have interviews, and somehow you must reference those things. You must let the reader know where you got your information and who the people are that you interviewed. Remember, referencing means that the reader must be able to somehow find that source for themselves to double check. Then we come on to the last one, which is newspaper columns. What I've highlighted here, a newspaper column pursues a point that the writer feels strongly about and wants to express views. So a newspaper column, it's written by senior writers very often. They've got to be very well read. They've got to be wise, because to give strong opinion, you've got to also have it as a balanced opinion. But this newspaper column, if you think of the poems we've done, I'd say that a poem like Superman is closest to the newspaper column idea because it's very strong opinion. And so what you're going to do there with the newspaper column, you're going to think of ones like this, okay, where a newspaper column often has the photo of the columnist because he's a senior person who's very trusted to write. This was about the Malusi Gigaba case and Norma Mngogama, the estranged wife, who it's very topical, it's very inflammatory, so it belongs in a column, which this is a political column, which went over 2 pages. So that's the thing with a column. It usually is very opinionated, and it is the one type of column is the one type of transactional piece for the media where you can go without quoting. Reviews, to some extent, you can also go without quoting, and then the other two, always you're going to need quotes, because that's where you're going to actually mention what other people said. So that brings me to the example that we had in the study guide, which I wanted you to comment on, because I said that I didn't think this was a very good example of magazine writing. I said that it's closer to maybe a report back about the sporting year in a school magazine. It's more on the school magazine level. So now I want you to tell me, this is the question, why would this not hold up to the standards of real life? There's something missing here in this little very nice report back that makes it below standard. So you can go and try and figure that out for yourself, but I'll give you a clue. It's a small thing, it's a punctuation mark, and it's not indirect speech. So there you are, very big tip, very big clue. You can go and judge that and decide why I think that this isn't really the best example for a magazine story. Okay, I hope that explains everything. Thank you.